So, a couple of weeks ago, after Far From Home released, there's been a lot of talk about Spider-Man. Whether or not the MCU adaptation of him is accurate, good, or even has the right to exist. There's a lot of conflict between hardcore fans of the comics and Raimi films versus people who love the MCU and Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And from a certain perspective, I understand the frustration. Spider-Man's been in the MCU for 3 years now, and some people want Spider-Man to be in the MCU, not the Iron Lad version people claim to be in there now. There are simply too many differences making this Peter Parker not my Peter Parker. So, my fleshies, today we're going to be talking about superhero adaptations, mostly through the lens of Spider-Man, or Spider-Men. Superhero movies are adaptations, and adaptations can be different. The more accurate something is doesn't mean the better it is. There are plenty of adaptations out there that improve upon the original work, like there's a subplot in the Godfather book about a huge vagina and a huge penis and corrective surgery, and it's just like, the movie doesn't have this, and it's a masterpiece. Now, whether or not you think an adaptation has to retain the same spirit or ideas as the original work is up to you. This whole video is basically going to be just my opinions on these subjects, so feel free to disagree with me in the comments below, or whatever. I'm not forcing you to be on my side. Personally, I value difference over similarity. I think that in the grand scheme of things, if you're going to be spending money remaking, adapting, rebooting something, you might as well make it different. Put your own spin on it, you know? However, I do realize that this shit pisses off hardcore fans of whatever you're adapting. Just like how people are like, how come Uncle Ben has absolutely no presence in Peter's life in the MCU? And I don't disagree. That's why I have a theory for this sort of thing. I think that people and fans want baselines. Strong, average versions of the characters they love. I think that's a thing that really bonds fans to new adaptations of characters. It worked for Spider-Man at least 3 times, and the original example of this aggregation would be Batman the Animated Series. In that, you have a Batman that combines the darkness of the Frank Miller stuff, but is careful to balance it out as it was for general audiences. It combines the essential elements of Batman, adds in a few new spicy things, and then biff bam pow, people love it. The most popular adaptations just tend to be distillations of what came before, but in a combined and all-new way, and usually in a new medium. You start to get diminishing returns the more you return to the same well. That's why you don't get more Batman animated series like Batman the Animated Series. That's why you get Batman Beyond, that's in the future. Brave and the Bold, that's like a campier take, and Beware the Batman, that's like CG and totally different. All very different shows than the Bruce Timm original one. And people don't really mind that because there's a baseline, and in that I find some similarities between the reception of Batman v Superman and the MCU version of Spider-Man. See, my whole baseline theory is kind of based on how things are done in comic books. Often, alternate takes on characters live in Elseworlds or what-if realities, meaning that they are just complements to the original characters, not substitutions. That means if that alternate universe Ghost Rider is boring to people, there's still some regular Ghost Rider for them to read. I think that the reason why people don't like the Snyder interpretations of characters in MCU Spider-Man is because they represent a very valid but also very different take on the characters. And when that alternate and very different take is made to be the universal main version of the character, that's when you run into problems with the fan. Some fans are rabid about representations of their characters, and when you're making the most widespread, most publicized versions, not the versions that they wanted, that's when they come for your throats. And man, are these versions different. A Superman that doesn't really smile or inspire hope. A Batman who kills. A Spider-Man not defined by the death of his uncle. These are things that are fundamentally very different from the source material. These are things that get fans mad. But I guarantee that people would be less mad if these were Elseworlds versions of the characters, like the new Todd Phillips Joker movie. It's not in continuity, has a new actor and a completely different origin for the Joker, and everyone's interested because we've had plenty of great Jokers, each of which represents something different. I think the problem is that for Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man, we haven't had a complete modern adaptation for them. We don't have true and proper baselines for the characters in the movies. Raimi's Spider-Man is the goalpost for comic accuracy, but that Spider-Man will never have the comic accurate interactions with a shared universe. Nolan's Batman is great and it's really well critically received, but they're not really comic accurate. And Cavill's Superman is kept wallowing or super serious in the movies. The only movie that was accurate to the comics, his face was kind of fucked up. Ugh. At least we had Christopher Reeve, but that was so long ago that people don't really consider those movies a choice to go back to. Those movies didn't have the CGI of the 2000s or even the 90s or the 80s. However, if you're a fan of superhero movies, I'd really recommend checking them out because it really gives you a nice little history lesson of how far we've come. And on the opposite end, accuracy really isn't everything? There are plenty of adaptations that have the little details right, but can't capture the original work. A primo example of this is Watchmen. Zack Snyder gets certain frames from the comics directly on screen and adapts it in a crazy accurate way, but misses the point and context of the comic book to certain people. Whether or not you think that difference was intentional is up to you. Personally, I think he just took a different interpretation of the book and adapted that instead. And if you take a closer look at Raimi's Spider-Man, he's really different. He doesn't face nearly as many villains as Peter does in the comics. He has organic web shooters, but between him and MCU Spider-Man, Raimi's Spider-Man really conveys a lot of the ideas at the core of the character, and that's the thing that makes him appealing. Accuracy to the core. That's one of the reasons why I think Spider-Verse really works on a fundamental level, because it takes those things that make up Spider-Man, like responsibility, heroism, guilt, and an everyman vibe, and makes a great origin for a new Spider-Man. And people resonate with that because even though it ain't Parker, it's definitely Spider-Man. Alas, adaptation is a fickle thing. Sometimes you get gems, and sometimes you get stinkers. But personally, I always like someone who's trying different stuff. A body horror, dark sci-fi version of the Fantastic Four sounded really interesting. And it's like, hey, there exists the original version, you can consume that content instead. If you ain't satisfied with Tom Holland, you can always watch some Raimi stuff, or read the comics, or watch the Amazing Spider-Man movies, which I love, please don't hit me. Of course, that's easier said than done. It took me a while to warm up to Tom Holland Spider-Man, because when you really love the characters, you just want to see the ideal versions on the big screen. You want to see a Spider-Man who pays homage to the comics, exists in an expanded universe, and still retains the core of who he is. A Spider-Man that saves people despite personal cost because he has to. Because he's driven by extraordinary responsibility and guilt that honestly outmatches his actual capability. And if you want that perfect version of Spider-Man, he's not in the MCU. He's on the PS4. Spider-Man PS4 is a perfect adaptation and is a crazy good game with a crazy good story. It is a Spider-Man media I'd recommend to any fan of Spider-Man and does him more justice than any of the movies, including the Raimi stuff. Us Spider-Man fans are so lucky there's a great interpretation like this to look to. So, just play that or watch a cutscene compilation if you need that comic accurate Spider-Man. I understand if you feel like this guy doesn't represent your ideal Spider-Man, but that's okay. They're doing something different. They're doing a mishmash of things that make the MCU's version of Spider-Man unique. Thanks for watching this video. I have a Twitter if you guys want to hear some micro hot takes or just want to keep up with old me. Also, thanks for subbing or watching or just even engaging and commenting. We're at 400 and something and that's wild. Stay cool and stay fleshy.